Mark Kikta. I retired as a captain in the United States Navy. What led me into the United States Navy? Well, my father worked for the Navy as a civilian in Washington, D.C., and he was always coaxing me, trying to get me to go into the Navy ROTC program after I finished high school. And I applied to the Naval Academy, but wasn't selected, so I applied to the Navy ROTC program, and I was selected. And I applied to Penn State, South Carolina, and North Carolina universities. And this was in 1968. So there were a lot of buildings being burned and ROTC buildings and things. So the ROTC didn't have a good reputation. So I decided that I didn't want to go up north where all the buildings were being burned in Penn State and places. So I went south to the University of South Carolina and started my Navy career as a young midshipman at South Carolina, and absolutely loved it. It was a wonderful, wonderful time. So I did that. I had already gone to some junior college, so I only stayed there for 3 years, and then I graduated. So back at the University of South Carolina, as I said, I only spent 3 years, not the full 4 years. So I only did 2 summer deployments, training deployments, which was required. And that was a topic of conversation. Which one should I go on? Because I couldn't do all 3, but which 2 should I do? And decided to send me to the second class midshipman deployment, which was a trip to Little Creek, Virginia to play Marine for, I think, 3 weeks. That wasn't my bag, but we did it. You get up in the morning and guys are beating on the pans and yelling at you, and you run all day, whatever. And so we did that. And then after that, we went to Corpus Christi, Texas, where I got to ride in an S2 and a T-34, and I learned then too that flying, I was picking the right career because I liked the flying a lot, and that's what I wanted to do. So we went to Texas. It was hot summer days, but we flew in airplanes and went back and had a great time. Now my senior year, between my junior and senior years, my senior training, I went to the John F. Kennedy, and that's my first time, and I got to ride an F-4 Phantom and ride with all these fighter guys, and that too was pretty big, pretty exciting. It was a lot of fun. And I have pictures actually of myself getting strapped in an F-4 Phantom. That was my only Phantom ride, was there on the Kennedy. So I spent a lot of time on the Kennedy in my career. I wanted to be a biologist. I wanted to be a marine biologist, actually. And so I went through college, taking all the courses, thinking I was going to be a marine biologist. And then I got the opportunity to take some flying lessons. The Navy had a program where you could go take flying lessons. They would pay for them, and they could see if you had the aptitude to fly before they sent you to flight school and spent millions of dollars on you. So I did that, and I had a great time. And my advisor said, well, let's put you in for flight school. So my eyes were only 20/25. They had to be 20/20 before you could go in. They could change later, but to go in, they had to be 20/20. And so he said, well, you're going to eat these vitamins, you're going to wear your sunglasses every day. And sure enough, I went to get my eye exam, passed it 20/20, and went into naval aviation. And so the rest is kind of history after that. I managed to go down to Pensacola, where everybody goes first, and then off to Beeville, Texas, and finish that part of my training. So you go to Pensacola and you pick whether you're going to fly jets or props or helicopters, and I got jets, and so off we went to Beeville, Texas, which, by the way, was a terrific place in those days, and a lot of fun and terrific people. Of course, you do all your carrier landings on the painted runways they have, and then you go out to the ship. First, you fly the T-2 Buckeye, and then we went out to the Lexington. We went to the USS Lexington. And I remember another story that I tell all the time is my first trap by myself in a T-2 on the Lexington. Nobody rides with you because they're not that stupid. They know you're going to do this by yourself, and they don't want you to kill them if you don't. So I'm out there and I'm rolling around the corner, coming into the groove, and I had just seen the movie Jaws. my knees, well, first of all, my knees were banging against a stick because I was so nervous on my first attempt at this thing. But I knew those sharks, I could see those sharks jumping out of that water down there, that I was going to jump out of this airplane and get eaten up by sharks. So it added a lot of stress in my mind to that day. But I got through that day. It was pretty exciting. And then leaving there was another great experience. So it was, I got all my landings, and the air boss says, okay, we pumped you full of gas, climb up to 2,000 feet and hook up with 610, and he'll take you back to the base. So I take off. I go up there and I'm orbiting around the ship looking for 610, and I didn't see him. And the air boss says, well, hey, did you find 610? And I said, no, I'm still looking. And he goes, all right, 610, rock your wings. So I see about 4 airplanes rock their wings. So once again, I was confused on who 610 is. So by the time we got around to figuring this out, he had to leave because he was running out of gas. And now I'm stuck back up there with getting low on fuel. And so the air boss said, okay, come back down and land and we'll fill you up again and send you off. So that was my first experience departing the ship in my plane by myself. Of course, then you go into advanced training, and that's the A4 Skyhawk then, the 2-seat version, and VT-25. It was VT-26 and T2 and VT-25 for my A4 flights. And so once again, for carrier training, we went back out to the Lexington, and it was not nearly as exciting. I didn't see the sharks in the water then, but I did all my landings, and I got out of there safely and sound, and flew home to Beeville. But basically, I flew T-34s and A4s, and all my landings were on Lexington. Well, the Lexington was a neat ship. You see movies about aircraft carriers, and of course, while I was flying off of them, I hadn't really spent too much time on them yet as a midshipman, just that one deployment in my training process. So we got some landings, and then everybody shut our airplanes down and said, go downstairs, we're taking a break, get some lunch, we'll give your plane some gas. So I got to roam around the ship and look at it, and I just was mesmerized. It was really, really cool, and I just can't wait to go to Corpus Christi actually to see the Lexington again someday, because I thought that was really neat. I became a flight instructor. My class had some number of, I don't know, 15, 20 people graduating, but they only had 5 open seats in the fleet aircraft. So I chose to stay as a flight instructor in Beeville, Texas for a while, and got a girlfriend and had a good time. And then all of a sudden, a skipper called me and said, "Hey, I got a seat open to go fly S3s." Excuse me. And so I said, "Well, I'll take it." And so then I went off from Pensacola from Beeville to North Island Naval Air Station, where they had the training squadron for S3A Vikings, and that would have been about 1976, 75, 76. And so we went to San Diego, learned to fly the S3 Viking, and then returned back to the East Coast to VS-32, where I began my career as a naval aviator flying S3s. At the time, we were on the John F. Kennedy, and made several deployments on the John F. Kennedy. I think I did, in that first squadron tour, I did 2 deployments on the Kennedy, and both were to the Mediterranean. In those days, you generally went to sea for 10 days, and then you pulled into port for 3 to 5 days. So we pulled into a lot of ports, and I was really excited to see places like Palma de Mallorca, Barcelona, Rota, and then we went into France, into Cannes, France, and I think we pulled into Naples a dozen times during our deployment. So that was pretty exciting. And then I had my wife even fly over one time in port. We were going to have 10 days in port, so the wives chartered a plane, and a whole bunch of wives came over, and we got to spend a few days together in the middle of a 6-month deployment. So that was a lot of fun. So the mission was basically just peacekeeping and projection of power around the Mediterranean. I called it sort of a Mediterranean love cruise, but that wasn't much of a love cruise. But that's what we did. The second deployment, as I remember it, was much the same thing, although I think we had a lot more time because that's the deployment that was 10 months long, I believe. 10-month deployment, and we had 3 or 4 days in port in the whole deployment. So that was, while I was in the Med, we looked at a lot of ports from the flight deck and not so many from in port ourselves. Had a great time. I loved flying off the ship. I loved flying the airplane. It was just a wonderful machine. And then after I finished my 3 years in the squadron flying at VS-32, I went to the training, I guess you say, organization there at Cecil Field, Florida, called the VS Support Unit. So we always encountered Soviet vessels and Soviet aircraft. So there were always fighters and bombers, Soviet airplanes flying overhead the ships, and then they would escort them with the F-4s or F-14s. But for us, as anti-submarine warfare airplanes, we had a bit of a different experience. We were always putting sonobuoys in the water to track submarines, and the Russians were always following us and pulling those sonobuoys out of the water, and you could hear them talking Russian on the microphones when they pulled them out of the water, so that was kind of funny. That was my first experience to have that happen. But yes, we would, because Russian submarines were following the carrier, and so we'd pick one up and we'd go out there and try to track them, and at the same time their spy vessels would be going through our field of sonobuoys, pulling the sonobuoys up out of the water, yeah, to look at it. They didn't get within, I don't know, 10 miles maybe of the carrier ever, and they did surface them. Those days most were diesel, I think, still, and so they would surface at night. So it was common for us on night flights to look for rain showers, and because they would surface inside of rain showers because the radar wouldn't pick them up from the ships and things, the airplanes. They would surface in a rain shower and snorkel and charge their batteries up using the diesels. I do remember one night we were tracking a submarine, a Soviet submarine, and by golly, he was right where they said he was going to be. We flew over him, and I had a crew, and I said, okay, I'll follow you, tell me where to go. I went over to a certain area where you're going to start dropping a buoy pattern. And we said, now just drop regular buoys, nothing special. And the first one that the guy dropped by mistake was a flare buoy. So it went into water, a giant fireball, and then the Russian submarine saw that, and he immediately went sinker, and we lost him. So we thought we had him, we were gonna get him. And then we did something stupid by dropping a flare, and he went sinker right away. But yes, we tracked submarines a lot. We tracked a lot of American submarines too, just as exercises. So we did a lot of those. In fact, we probably did more exercises than we did Russian submarines. But we did them. It was fun. The Russians did push their limits. The boats that followed us sometimes got just several hundred yards behind, picking up the trash. If they weren't picking up our sonobuoys, they were picking up the ship's trash that they threw overboard. Because in those days, the ships threw everything overboard, and now they compact it and burn it, so it's not an environmental issue. But back in the 70s, it was a different story. I went to the training, I guess you say, organization there at Cecil Field, Florida, called the VS Support Unit. That doesn't exist any longer, but at the time, that was the only training unit we had at Cecil Field, so we trained guys in the simulators and things like that. I did that for 3 years, and then I got picked to go back to VS-22 to be the department head in a squadron. That's a lieutenant commander job. And I went in first as the maintenance officer, and then I became the operations officer of the squadron after that. So I did my time then in VS-22, flying off the John F. Kennedy. Again, even though it's a different squadron, they had changed their wings on the ship, so now I'm back on the ship that I like as a department head. So I did that. Then I got orders to the John F. Kennedy as a ship's company person. I went there as the assistant air operations officer, and later became the air operations officer when my boss kind of got relieved, so somebody had to take his job, so I did. And I loved that ship. The John F. Kennedy was a really, really neat ship. And because of the name of the ship, everywhere we went was treated with kid gloves and a lot of pomp and circumstance, and just really a neat experience. We finished the deployments on the John F. Kennedy and VS-22, and then after that, I went back to Cecil Field again as part of the wing, and I taught people how to fly the new S3. They had made a number of modifications to the S3A, and it became the S3B, and I became the first flight instructor there at Cecil Field, showing people how to fly the new changes in the S3B. So I did that at the wing, and at the wing I had other jobs, and one of the jobs I had was I was a CACO officer. A CACO officer is a Casualty Assistance Control, and we lost a gentleman in VS-22, and I was his CACO officer to his family for a while. That was a job I didn't enjoy, but that's the only one I had in the Navy in 26 years that I didn't enjoy. So I finished that, I got screened for command, and I went back to VS-32 as the executive officer. And by that time, VS-32 was on the USS America. We deployed a number of times on the USS America. The first deployment was to the Mediterranean. One of my most memorable moments on that deployment was being told that I was going to fly to Naples, Italy, and pick up Chairman Colin Powell, who had never landed on a ship in his life. And Lieutenant Commander, I was a commander, Commander Kikta was going to go get him. So the America was over by Rota, Spain, actually just inside the Mediterranean from Rota, Spain. And I flew to Naples and landed and picked up Colin Powell, another one-star general, and the lieutenant that was helping me fly. So we picked them up and we flew them back to the America from one side of the Mediterranean to the other. Interesting enough, he was interested in antique cars, as I am. We talked about restoring cars, and then of course they asked me a lot of questions about all your junior officers. What do they think about this, or what do they think of, why do they stay in, or why do they not stay in? So he sat 12 inches from me all the way across the Mediterranean. We had a great time. So when we landed on the ship, one of the stories that I tell a lot actually is the one-star general was sitting in the back seat with the lieutenant, and we were coming around the corner to land at the ship. We were about 10 seconds from touching down, and this general looks out and he goes, "Oh my gosh, look at that, isn't that neat?" And Colin Powell turns around and he says, "Not now, goddammit, Mark Kikta's flying, Mark's flying." So we're paying attention, So it was hilarious. I never heard two generals talk to each other like that. But we landed on the ship, the general did his thing with everybody, and then he got back in my airplane and I flew him back to Italy. So that was probably my most memorable experience in the squadron, doing that. The America, it had a great name, and I was looking forward to deploying on America. But nothing, at the time, I thought nothing could compare to the Big John F. Kennedy. That was kind of my love for carriers at the moment. But the America was a good ship, and the crew was great. That's where I learned to drive the ship, because I was a squadron CO, and the captain said all the squadron COs had to come learn how to drive the ship while replenishing alongside, because he didn't want to do it all himself. So he would sit in his big easy chair on the right-hand side of the island. We would drive the ship, and by driving the ship, I don't mean actually turning the wheel. I mean telling them, left 1/2 degree, port 240, or all ahead full, or 2 RPMs, increase RPMs by 2, or back by 1/2. But we had to stay in position as we were alongside our replenishing ships. Anyway, I learned to do that. It was a lot of fun. So after I finished that deployment as the executive officer, then I became the commanding officer of the S-32 on America, and then came Desert Storm. So we went over, we were up in the North Atlantic, but then Desert Storm came along, and that was a different experience. I had not experienced any combat before, so One of the nights that I remember as one, I guess emotional is the right word. We were all on board our ship. We were on America. Kennedy was in the Red Sea with us in Med, and so was Saratoga. And we had a big powwow, so all the CEOs of the squadrons got in helicopters and flew to the Kennedy. And we had a meeting about Desert Storm, saying, okay, tonight at midnight, Desert Storm's going down, and you know, all the details of what we were going to do. Then we got back in our helicopters and flew back to our respective ships. And I remember thinking, the only thing I was worried about was how many wives was I going to have to tell, sorry, your husband was a great guy, but he didn't make it. I didn't sleep well that night thinking about that. But you know, as it turned out, it was great. And the next big decision I thought that I had to worry about was who was going to fly the first mission. Doesn't seem like it ought to be a big deal, but when you're the CEO and you got a squadron full of young men that are, you know, type A personalities and they want to do well, work hard, you have to figure out how to keep them motivated. So should I let the junior officers go on the first mission, or should the old man be the first guy on the first mission? You know, some are going to say, well, he stole the glory to go in the first one, and some would say he's a wimp, he doesn't want to go in the first one. So anyway, I took the first one, but it was an issue for me figuring out who should go, who should I schedule on the first combat mission in Desert Storm. Well, for us, we did a lot of tanking we were out of the Red Sea, and we did a lot of tanking missions for the Hornets and the EA-6Bs. We would go up, take off with the flight, head inbound to overland, and then we tied up a lot of times with the EA-6Bs because they had the HARM missiles. And what we would do is we'd turn our radar. We had a special mode in our radar that we could tickle the radar sites, and they would turn on their radars, and then the EA-6B would just home on that signal and blow it up. It's kind of like going to a fair and hitting the little furry heads that pop up we'd turn on that site, and then we'd shoot them down and go over to another one and do the same thing. And then when we were done with that, we'd go back halfway to the ship, and then we would refuel any of the F-18s or anybody that needed gas headed back to the ship. So those were the missions we did first. Later on, our missions in Desert Storm didn't change too much, other than we got to do some bombing of enemy patrol boats on the other side of the water there, because you had the Red Sea, then we had to go around to the Gulf, and so we did both. The American was the only carrier that did both. We half the time in the Red Sea and half in the Persian Gulf, and that's where we got to see the Iraqi patrol boat. There's another funny story that took place with that. I didn't actually get to drop the bombs. It was one of my department heads actually in another plane. But it was the same flight that I was on. We took off a flight of 2 S-3s off the ship, and my job on that mission was tanking. That's all I was going to do. So I spent the whole flight running up to the KC-135, taking on fuel, going back down around the ship and refueling who needed it. I was a bucket brigade for fuel. The other flight the other guys in my flight had the bombs, and they were up looking for an Iraqi patrol boat to drop a bomb on. So here's 4 young guys, all very excited, and they finally find one, and they cleared them in hot to bomb. Now the S-3 didn't have the quality bomb sights that the A-6s did or anything, so we basically had a flip-up bomb sight, and we put a grease pencil mark on the window, and that's what we used to drop bombs. And because we weren't a real fast airplane like an F-14, we dropped our bombs at 22,000 feet or 20,000 feet, and then we pulled off so we couldn't get shot down. If we had dropped them at 5,000 feet, it would have been easy for somebody to shoot us down. So these guys rolled in on that mission quite hot, and they were cleared to drop their bombs. The pilot said, okay, I'm going to roll over and dive in on this guy, and you push the buttons on your side there, co-pilot. So he did, but he didn't configure the panel right. He dropped all the bombs, plus he dropped the gas tanks that he had on the side of his airplane to refuel people. And so they did that, and from what we understand from the EP3s that actually saw it, that the bombs hit the patrol boat, but the gas from the drop tank caused a huge fireball and explosion. They said it was a sight to behold. So they were quite famous for doing that. But in the meantime, they were flying back to the ship. It was time to do a recovery, and I was orbiting overhead the ship, waiting to land, and here comes my wingman, and he had dropped all his bombs in the gas tank. And he pulled up alongside, and I looked out there, and I said, his call sign was Baja. I said, Baja, did you take off with one of the fuel tank on the gas tank on the left side? And he said, yes, skipper. I said, I'm going to kill you when we land, because I could just see how much paperwork I was going to have to fill out for all this missing refueling pod. But the Air Wing commander said, hey, this is war, buddy. You don't need to fill out any paperwork. So he went on down to land, and I went off to do some more tanking. But that was one kind of funny mission. We came home. I'm trying to remember exactly the date. I don't. But we came home, and everyone thought, oh man, Tailhook Association, you know, they're putting on their big Tailhook reunion in Vegas, and we came home war heroes. We're going to go out there and make a big splash. And of course, everybody remembers that Tailhook did not have a good splash that year. It became pretty ugly, and they did a lot of things that they shouldn't have done. A lot of people got relieved. Thank goodness. At the last minute, they said, you guys got something else to do. We're going to send you to the North Atlantic. You don't have time to go to Tailhook. So I think that saved all of our careers, but we went to the North Atlantic and had a good time there, and it did that. So after I finished my tour as a commanding officer, then after that I went to Washington, D.C. in the Bureau of Naval Personnel. And that really didn't scratch my itch very much. I wasn't too impressed with that job. I didn't like it. But, you know, you do a lot of things you don't like. So I managed to get that behind me. And then I went to Saratoga as the air boss. And on board Saratoga, I had the time of my life. I worked a lot of hours. I didn't sleep much. But I had 680 of the hardest working sailors in the whole wide world working for me in the Air Department. And then I went to Saratoga as the air boss, and on board Saratoga I had the time of my life. I worked a lot of hours. I didn't sleep much, but I had 680 of the hardest working sailors in the whole wide world working for me in the Air Department, running the catapults, the resting gear, and all that stuff. So it was a really good experience. It was one that is my favorite command job in my Navy career, and if I had to pick all of them, which one would I go back to, it would be my job as the air boss on the Saratoga. I just loved it. Saratoga was one of the oldest ships I was ever on, but it really had a great personality. And at the time, the captain we had was a great guy, and the guys I was going to work for as a new guy on the ship, they were terrific. So you come on board, there's an air boss and there's a mini boss. Mini boss is like the XO. But the new guy that comes on to replace the mini boss is the micro boss. So I had a shirt that said micro boss on it. And the first thing I thought was, I'm not sure what I got myself into. This is a pretty complicated looking job. But soon I figured out that I could deal with this. And I went on to be the mini boss. And I would say that we had 680 of the hardest working kids in the entire ship. They liked to get in a lot of trouble when we were in port, so if we keep them at sea, they did a lot better. But they were just wonderful kids. They worked themselves to death. If you ask them to do one little thing, they always did 10 big things. I just loved that experience. I loved being in charge of such hard-working people and dedicated to the Navy mission and professionals. Those guys are true professionals on the flight deck and the catapults. We never lost an airplane, never hurt anybody. Just really professional guys. So anyway, I went into the mini boss, and I also remember my first night as the mini boss. It was a bit frightening. So what they normally do is the mini boss sits in the right seat, and he kind of orchestrates catapults 1 and 2, and then the air boss is the real boss. He's in the left seat, and he's orchestrating cats 3 and 4. And so we're going along, and all of a sudden there's a huge explosion on the flight deck. Accidentally, they tried to fire one airplane past another with the wing spread on the one that wasn't getting fired. And they hit each other. They knocked the Sidewinder missile off, and the Seeker has, what do you call it, mercury in the Seeker, and the Seeker mercury was running around the flight deck. The missile had come off and broken the leg of the catapult officer, compound fracture. So he was laying on the deck, and these 2 airplanes are sitting there at 100% full power, you know, locked into each other, and it was, I'm thinking, this is scary stuff. Luckily, he survived fine, and everybody did okay. But that was my very first night as the mini-boss. And it went uphill from there. We did a lot of, I didn't do Desert Storm on there as an air boss or anything, but we did shoot a Turkish ship by mistake one night. I was in the tower as the mini boss, and I saw this missile come up out of our launcher and go over and hit a ship. And I called down to the ship's combat center and I said, "What are you guys doing? You just shot the Turkish ship." This was an exercise. I knew that they were out there as part of our exercise. And they said, "Hey, Air Boss, quit joking, man. This is nothing to be kidding about." Well, about that time, another missile went out of the launcher and hit that Turkish ship. So it was a frightening experience that could happen on an exercise. The exercise was supposed to start at midnight, and at 12:01, the first missile left and hit a ship. There's a long story on who was at fault, and the captain got relieved and all that. That was unfortunate. But the next 48 hours for me and us in the tower was unbelievable. We didn't sleep for 2 days. By the time it ended, we had 14 people that we killed on board the Turkish ship. We, of course, helicoptered every one of them to the carrier. And that was the first time I had ever seen us activate the walking blood bank. So we had guys down there donating blood. We had very injured people. The captain was brought over in a bag about the size of a basketball. He was in the bridge, and we hit the bridge twice with 2 missiles. So he didn't make it. And then I had to find, of course, we had to do services for these guys that were dead on our ship. So we found the caskets, and we had to find 16 Turkish flags. You wouldn't believe how hard of a task that was. 12 hours I have to find 16 Turkish flags. So I had helicopters going everywhere in the Mediterranean looking for Turkish flags. But we did. We covered all the coffins. We had the Turkish admirals coming out to do services on the flight deck. It was a very sad, hard time, but we got through that. That was just another one of Saratoga's tough times in her career. Those experiences were something that leaves you with funny feelings, and it makes you wonder. This is a tough life out here. This isn't something not to fool around with. Well, and every Navy pilot gets a call sign, and you don't get to pick your call signs. My first call sign was Grumpy, because I was kind of grumpy in my young junior officer days, and that's how it was going. So when I became an XO of my squadron in VS-32, I remember that we were on the way home from a Mediterranean deployment, but during that deployment, when the guys were bad, first I would be the first guy to see the bad boys, and so I'd take them to XOI, and I'd try to embarrass them or something into being good guys and not doing bad things, and I was just a tough XO, and that's what XOs are supposed to be, tough guys. So when we were on the way home from deployment, and we had an enlisted guy who was a professional auctioneer on the side. And the wives sent us a bunch of boxes to the officer's wardroom to auction off these boxes, and they were lingerie. That's what they put in there. And they weren't allowed to put names on them. They could only put a poem or something to let you know who it was. Hopefully you could understand the poem. And then we bid on them. So this enlisted guy, came up in the ready room, and he was auctioning off these boxes of lingerie. guys could tell exactly, that's my wife, but of course, he wanted to bid on that lingerie for his wife. And we were on our way home, and then the wives would take the money and have a party. So I just remember this enlisted guy going, hey, he was really good at it. I don't know how to do it, but he'd say, and what about you, Spine Ripper? And the whole place went wild laughing, and from that day forth, I was Spine Ripper. I could never shake that again. I would take off, and we would take off a flight of 4, and we shortened it to Ripper. But we'd say, Rippers, check in, button 4, you know, and we'd 1, 2, Ripper 1, Ripper 3, yeah. So that call sign was all the way until I retired. Actually, everyone still calls me Spine Ripper when they see me. I would like the Saratoga remembered by future generations, that it was one of the true fighting ships of our country. It was a primary player in making the world a safer place, and it went everywhere from Vietnam to Desert Storm and everywhere in the world to do that. And it was just a terrific ship. I think the people on it, of course, the ship is nothing without the people. The people on it and the ship were a wonderful asset to this country, and it was awesome. Those were some of my best times as air boss on there, even though they were not so much fun. We all chipped in together, and we all made it happen, and it was terrific. And then I went to be the wing commander at Cecil Field, to start at Cecil Field. The S-ray wing commander, we had 5 squadrons, and I got selected for command again, and so I went to Cecil Field. And it was just the beginning of them moving from Cecil Field to NAS Jacksonville. They were closing Cecil Field, so everything had to go somewhere. I think all the F-18s went to Oceana, and all the S-3s went over to NAS Jacksonville. So we moved the wing over to NAS Jacksonville, and that transition was a bit rocky. The P-3s fly with, you know, a crew of 11. We fly with a crew of 4, and they fly mostly using VHF radios, although they have UHF radios, and we don't have VHF radios. So we would get in the landing pattern, and we couldn't hear each other. We couldn't tell what he was doing because we weren't on his same frequency. So for a while, it was very confusing, very difficult transition. But we finally got everybody on the same frequency and the same radio, and we made that work. So that worked out quite well. As a wing commander, I retired there after 25 years and 11 months, I think it was, and then I went to work for a defense contractor after that.